So your wife or your husband or your boyfriend or your girlfriend doesn't want to have sex with you. What are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? I'm going to tell you. I'm going to tell you the different things that you can try, the different ways you can communicate to get over that hump and to embrace the fact that things are a little broken without it completely destroying and crumbling your relationship. So the first thing I want to tell you is don't panic. Don't panic and don't pout, right? The the fact of the matter is that it's not a one night stand. Every relationship, I hope, is more of a marathon than a sprint. And so if you're in a little bit of a dry spell with your partner or they don't want to have sex, the worst thing you could do is panic and think they don't love me anymore. Because in that panic, you'll pull away from one another and you'll make all these assumptions about where the relationship really is that might not necessarily be true. And as you do that, you're going to make rash decisions. You're going to say, well, maybe I'll start talking to another woman or another man. Or maybe I need to brace myself for being dumped, essentially, or a divorce. And so you withdraw emotionally. Also, very dangerous. Not a great idea. Now, I get it. If you're rejected from, that fun night in the bedroom, your ego's going to take a hit. You're going to naturally assume that you're not attractive anymore, or that you've done something to break the relationship. But know that that might not necessarily be true, right? It's amazing to me how many times I've talked to a husband specifically where they've come into me alone. They start as a couple coming into me in session. Then they come to me for a one-on-one. Happens all the time. And they say, I tried to make an advance. I tried to initiate. My wife rejected me. What the hell, right? And I say, well, when was that? And they'll say last night or the night before. And I'll say, why don't you just try again tonight? Or, and they say, well, what happens if she rejects me again? Try again tomorrow and the next day and the next day. Accept the rejection politely, but always try and pursue. And one of two things will happen. Either they will end up having sex and he'll realize, oh, I just needed to be patient, which is most of the time. Or there's a real problem in the relationship. And eventually, with enough initiation, his wife will say, hey, we need to talk. In which case, you're bringing that conversation that is really necessary for the healthier relationship to the forefront. You're not pushing it back by ignoring the fact that you haven't had sex for 6 months, right? You're bringing it up, you're pulling it out, and you need to have those conversations. Which leads me to my next point, which is communicate like an adult. If you're not interested in just initiating and forgiving, and that's a little bit too much of a tall order for you, or you feel like the rejection has gotten more sharp and has, sometimes a man or a woman will reject with a little bit of an insult, right? I mean, it's sad, but true. That sometimes someone will say, you want to have sex, and the spouse will say, ugh, right? That's horrible, right? It's not no thank you, or I have a headache. It's ugh. When you hear ugh or like no, why would you ask? When it gets to that kind of bitter abrasiveness, you really do have to have a conversation, right? So how do you communicate? How do you communicate like an adult and not a whiny teenager? Because that's no good. Talk to your spouse, right? Do it without being accusatory. Do it without guilt tripping. And remember, this is your husband. This is your wife. This is your boyfriend. This is your girlfriend. This is not your arch nemesis. This is someone that should, by all intents and purposes, understand that you have sexual needs. And you should be able to express those to your partner, and they should be able to express them to you. Right? I cannot tell you how many couples are fighting like cats and dogs, and yet they still have sex. Why? Because people have sexual needs. And so if you're able to talk about them, that's already half the battle. So how do you talk about it? It's a lot like flossing. Right? Communicating is a lot like flossing. Everybody knows they should do it, but not so many people do it, and even fewer do it regularly. So if the problem that we're talking about in this case is that you're not having enough sex, you take your partner and say, listen, I've tried to initiate sex for a few nights. I've noticed you rejected me. Whether they reject you politely or not doesn't really matter. You can say so. You can say, I've noticed that you've been rejecting me. Is there something wrong? Is there something that's preventing you from wanting to have sex with me? That's it. And then you shut your mouth and let them answer. If you cut them off, you are going to truncate all the information coming your way, and you'll have a partial answer that very often will hide part of the valuable truth that you need to fix the damn thing. So don't do that. Don't be an idiot. Shut your mouth and let them talk. Now, if all they say is, I don't know, then you got to keep pulling it out, right? If you say, is there a reason that we're not having sex? And your wife goes, yeah, you got a problem, right? Then you have to say, what do you mean, She says, well, I don't really want to talk about it, right? At that point, you're allowed to push, but again, not in a whiny way. You have to say, look, we're married or we're dating, and a big part of the relationship to me is our sexual relationship. I thought that was a big part of it for you as well. Has something changed? Right? You could start with those binary questions, those yes or no questions. Has something changed? Now, if you get another right, then you have a serious problem on your hands. If someone says twice like that, like, I don't know, whatever, you got a problem. So you got to pull a little harder. You have to say, listen, this is becoming very frustrating. I'm asking what's wrong. You're saying, I don't know. I'm trying to communicate that I have sexual needs and I want to know about yours. And I want to know what's blocking you from being open that way. And you're saying, I don't know. I'm not here because I want to take from you. I want to have a relationship where you're happy too. And something is clearly blocking. If you're in pain physically, I want to know. If there's something going on emotionally where you feel neglected or that you're not a priority in my life, I want to know. If there's something going on at work or with your family, I deserve to know, because nobody deserves to be rejected sexually again and again like this without at least getting some clarity. If that's the case, if you want to have a relationship where we just don't tell each other anything, we might as well not be together. And I don't want that. Is that what you want? Right? And if the person says, I don't know, at that point, then call a therapist, because that's you've been as articulate as you could possibly be, right? So talk to them that way. Say, look, I want sex, right? If it's too much pressure for you, just start listing things very calmly without any preconceived notion that it's your fault, right? If you've done something and you're open to hearing that it's your fault and you put it out on the table and they say it, welcome it with open arms. Which leads me to my last point, right? Which is you need to spice things up. Now, it could be that you need to spice things up emotionally, right? A lot of women, for example, will say that I would love to have more sex, but I can't just turn it on like a faucet. I need to be taken out. I need to be wined and dined a little, or I need a compliment. Or a lot of women say, I feel like I'm doing all the housework and taking care of the kids all by myself, and that doesn't make me want to have sex with him. Sometimes doing the dishes and a little vacuuming ends up getting a husband laid. That's the bottom line, right? I mean, I hate saying it in such crude terms, but it works, right? And some cases with men, right? Women come to me and say, my husband isn't so sexually interested. And that can be incredibly painful for a woman, because the way society is built, and the way I think human nature is for the most part, is that men typically are the initiators and want sex more than women. But there are a lot of relationships where the woman has the higher drive. And so it's hard for them to accept it. It's hard for them to really know how to deal with it. And so a lot of times it's because men feel pressured. Maybe they have erectile dysfunction. Maybe there's a lot of stress at work. Maybe they're just short on sleep. A lot of possible answers here. But what you have to do is say, listen, I'm feeling neglected. I don't like initiating sex. You used to initiate it more. Is something wrong? I really would like to have sex this many times a week, and I feel like we have it this many times a month. And I want to know how we can get back there. What do you need from me in order to make that a possibility? So sometimes it's that emotional connection, right? But when you open the door that wide and say, what do you need from me? You're also suggesting that physically you can be open-minded, right? So, say, look, is there something physically that you want to see in the bedroom? And not just emotionally. And do you want some lingerie? Do you want me to put on some music? Do you feel like sex is boring and predictable? Is there an element of sex that's missing for you? Try to get to the bottom of it. But the bottom line is to communicate like your best friends, right? Because best friends who are physically attracted together make wonderful lovers. They really just do. So learn how to communicate about this with your partner, and you'll find that you usually can solve this much easier than you think. But if you're going to keep yourself in the dark, if you're going to get offended, if you're going to get whiny, right? If you start saying, we never have sex, what's wrong? How come I don't do enough? If you're going to have that attitude, you're going to buy yourself another month of a dry spell. Don't do it that way. Sit down calmly, smiling. Be assured that your partner likes you and say, what's wrong? Tell me, come on, I want more. I know that you used to want more. What has changed? And really get to the bottom of it. I hope this was helpful. My name is Dr. Jon Dabach, and I will see you next time.